everybody. Bobby here, Jeremy. We are trying something new, which we've been thinking about doing for a couple of weeks before the COVID-19 hype and ramp up and precautions that we're all trying to implement with great care in our lives. So welcome to After Party Season 1.
Yeah.
Episode 1. Should we go back?
Let's start all over again. So this is our first time trying this. So there's going to be a few technical glitches along the way. But the idea here was we were talking a couple weeks ago about the idea of taking Sunday and having more of a free-flowing conversation coming out of that, starting with Bobby and I, but then opening that up to people in the community, other staff members. We just thought that might be kind of fun. We're writing sermons and then we're creating content for YouTube, but it's sort of pre-packaged and ready to go. And we thought maybe something a little more free-flowing would be fun. And then COVID came along and we got shut down and we went online only. And we thought, well, maybe this is a good time for us to just accelerate all of that, which is why we're doing this the first time, not knowing when our mics are muted, because we're figuring this out as we go here. So welcome.
I don't really know which camera to look at.
Yeah.
Jared has cameras and screens and cords all over, but I'm going to try my best to connect with you through all of our gear.
Great.
So welcome to After Party. Along with the content that we make in the week, I was also interested in, I don't know if the word is like highlighting, but we have all of this, like these beautiful connections in our team and sort of like this between Sundays life of developing our content, talking out our ideas, sharing like even our personal stories with one another, that it would be a fun thing to kind of bring some of that to you in conversation. So here we are.
Yeah.
I did also want to say, and with great care about the seriousness of this moment, that we recognize people are holding changing plans and lots of things coming to an end and sort of managing their own mental health and anxiety. So we recognize the seriousness of this moment. And still, there are these places where there's life and laughter and being able to kind of like riff on what's actually happening. Maybe not with all of our thoughts totally, completely, perfectly put together, and welcoming that, the kind of messiness of it and just the humanity of it. So Jared and I, when we chat, there's usually some laughter in most conversations. So I wanted to say, like, I'm sure that as we're talking today, we will laugh. And I think that that's good and healthy and beautiful and important, but know that we're not trying to make light of this moment. It is a serious moment and we hold it with great care, and we hold what's going on for you with great care.
Which is, I mean, ironic because we're in this story of Jonah, which is all about this sort of really, no, you were going to talk about this. All right, never mind.
No, you're just going now.
But just the idea, you know, we're talking about Jonah right now, which is this, I mean, really heavy story about, you know, the love of God for our enemies, how God takes us to places that we don't want to go, to spread grace where we don't want it. And yet it comes to us in the form of this comedy. Like it's a comedic story that gets us to laugh and get down our guard. And there's something, I think, an interesting parallel there to be in a time when things are very serious and a lot of us are very anxious right now. But to hold in one hand the complexity of that and the seriousness of that and all the awareness that it deserves, also with the ability to continue to move on with life and to have humor and have laughter and enjoy ourselves, even as, you know, we're sort of trapped in our homes right now doing these things. So
when I was getting ready to come to the church today, I have been at home for 2 days, which for an extrovert like me is kind of driving me bonkers. And Jonathan just got home and he looked up at me and he was like, well, you can't beat the traffic right now, which wasn't like a hilarious thing, but it was just like a moment to be like, it's a weird time. You can't beat the traffic right now. So how are things at home for you?
Things are good. I think right now, I just went home and had dinner and came on my way back. And my wife was like, you know, there needs to be a better balance here. I think myself and all of the staff have been sort of running like long hours right now, making sure that plans are together and we're adapting to things, we're communicating well. There's been so many Zoom meetings with staff and board and other pastors that we're in contact with, passing things around. And it's great. We need to do all that. But I think sort of the new normal will hopefully start setting in this next week, and we'll have a little bit more time to be at home because Rachel is home with a new infant, but now also with our 6-year-old who's home from school, and she has been managing all of that. And if you're watching right now, Rachel, we're apologizing, or I'm apologizing for continuing to be away so much. But I think we are finding our new rhythms, like a lot of families right now, is what is going to be this new normal. Because I think we all realize now this is not going to be a week. It's not going to be 2 weeks. It's going to be an extended period of figuring this out.
Right. Yeah. Also, Jeremy Duncan's wearing a hoodie.
Yeah, it's true. This is like, this is away from work. Physical contact is shut down.
Like
I didn't
life
have to.
is completely turned upside down. I don't know what to do with this.
That's true.
No,
I'm surprised nobody commented in there that we needed, that I was not wearing a gray shirt today. So
great. Okay. Do you want to hear how things are going at my home?
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it. Here.
Things are great. We have a quiet existence, Jonathan and I. I was thinking a while ago in the last, few months, that like in my 30s and in my 20s, I think I really thought I wanted like this really vibrant, like social life. And I think that if I would have wanted that, I would have made it happen. I never really had that. I like to be at home. I like to be at home with Jonathan. So our life is in some ways like kind of like it's always been. We're just hanging out and enjoying that. Although Jonathan does work for a private school, and he is like running so hard. So I'm trying to be a good support to him as well. So things are good at our home.
Good.
Okay, so let's talk about even just some of the decisions that we've been making in the last like 8 hours around our community, decisions we've made, around COVID-19 and how to take great care.
Yeah, I mean, right now, everybody saw we moved online for this Sunday. And initially, the plan was like, let's move online for 2 weeks, let's evaluate, and let's go. Now we're definitely at the point where we are online for the next 4. We're going to evaluate as we go. But I think chances are, depending on the news that comes down from Alberta Health, I think there's a good chance that we are going to be online only probably for 6 to 8 weeks. And I don't want to scare anybody with that because the idea of that can be intimidating. But I think that's the reality of it. And so now we're having to rethink not just how we get the service online on a Sunday, but how we do ministry well. Like, how do we engage in conversations like this? How do we keep people connected? If we can't have our small groups happening throughout the week, how do we make sure that people are cared for, not just with their physical needs, but emotionally and spiritually, and all of that comes along with it. So we're thinking about that. We're also thinking about, plan B and plan C when it comes to things like, if all non-essential services are shut down, if we're not able to use the church facility, how can we put together sermons? How can we put together worship? How can we put together a sermon online, even if we have to be in multiple locations to get that out to people? Because, the strange thing about the situation is all this is happening in the world, but it's happening during Lent. Like the center of our Christian calendar, where we're preparing ourselves for death and resurrection and this whole central story to Christianity. And not that any time would be good to shut down services and go online and not be able to be with each other. But I think through that Easter season, where I think for a lot of us, myself personally, sort of you gather a lot of strength for the year, you gather a lot of the celebration for the year, and you sort of store that up. Right. To not be able to experience that, to not have the joy and the frivolity and the celebration of all of that, I think is a big loss. It is for me. Yeah. So how can we then do everything we can to bring all of that into the community online? And we're not really sure about that, so we're open to suggestions and comments. But I mean, these are things that our team is beginning to think about now.
I was listening to Reply All they put out like a 5-minute episode saying they were doing a call-in. Reply All. Yeah. Reply All. I'm a fan. Podcast. Jared's a fan. I've been a fan for longer.
That's true.
I love them so much. But they asked the question that I think we can borrow and change one word from. And they're just asking the question. They got all of their team together who make the show, and they said, like, what is the show right now? And I was thinking about that question for us. What is the church right now?
Right now, yeah.
Yeah. we're thinking about that. Yeah, in a sense, you asked that question
Mhm.
when our team was on Zoom today. We have to think about what we are, who we are
Mhm.
right now. If we aren't, our rhythms of hosting a space where people come with their whole selves, their bodies, their brains, their emotions, their families, every Sunday. When we take like our bodies gathering out of the equation, who are we? Like, what are we?
I mean, it's interesting because church, a lot of what we do is content creation. We're here on YouTube. We're creating content right now. We're writing sermons. We're creating content. All of that's important. It's a big part of our jobs in terms of time commitment throughout the week.
Yeah.
But the experience of church is not about consuming content, no matter how good that content is. The experience of the community is the gathering and the being together. And I think this is the interesting challenge for us is we can continue to create content all day. In fact, we've got less distractions now when it comes to creating content.
Right.
But that's not really what church is.
Yes.
That content is, if I can say it this way, it's the carrot that gets us in the room that then gives us the experience of what it means to be together and to engage our bodies and our souls and our minds and our emotions and all of that at the same time. And, there's going to be a video coming out on YouTube probably tomorrow or Thursday. And I'm talking a little bit about praying with your body, especially right now where we're all anxious.
Yeah.
Because I realize this when I'm anxious, I carry that in my body. Like for me, it's my jaw, but people, it's their shoulder. Yeah, it's an ongoing thing for me that my jaw is always sore when I'm anxious because I clench my teeth when I sleep at night. But then what does it mean for us to pray with our whole body, to relax with our whole body? And what does it mean for us to worship as a church with our whole body? Because gathering and being in the space together is a really important part of this. And we're losing that now.
And I often think about those spaces between us,
Mhm.
like how sacred those moments are, people being greeted as they come into the room and looking around the room and seeing that you're like all participating in this community experience together and saying hi and helping someone during coffee. Like those are incredibly sacred.
Yeah, there is an interesting thing. Like serving coffee doesn't feel sacred until you're not serving coffee to someone the next week.
Right.
Or greeting at the door, which can kind of be this thing that feels a little perfunctory. I say hi to everyone, I shake their hand. All of a sudden, even that week, 2 weeks ago when we did church, but we couldn't shake people's hand, it was this strange moment to realize, oh, this is important. Like this is meaningful. It's not just this thing that I do. It feels meaningful now that it's gone. And my hope is part of that this is what we'll recognize in this time.
Right.
We'll continue to meet in different ways. We'll continue to talk. We'll continue to talk about the Bible and create content. But maybe when we come back, things will feel sacred in a different way.
So we are going to talk more. We are going to talk about more things than COVID-19 and the time that we're in. We're going to get to some of the themes of the sermon. But I do want to do what you're doing here. This, like, what's our opportunity for, like, if we were to look at this and say, like, what's our glass half full kind of scenario? Like, who do we hope to be coming through this? But I also want to do the, like, what is the glass half empty? Like, I don't want to be afraid to ask that question too. So we're saying, who could we be? How could this be shaping us in like good, beautiful, wise ways? Realizing the importance of being in spaces together. When we don't have something, we realize its importance. What are some of the other things that you think about in terms of like this could make us? Jonathan and I've been talking about. I keep saying we live right on 17th, and it's a very noisy part of the city. And I keep saying like this is a great quieting. Like our little condo is so much quieter just because the traffic is not zooming by at the speed and as many cars as usual. So there's something about like, oh my gosh, like I'm me in this kind of quiet space. Like there's a gift in the quieting. I'm not saying it's that simple, but that's the opportunity to be like, well, here's something that's good in our life in this moment. But back to the church and who this could make us when we think like glass half full.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I have noticed is even just being home a little bit more and what's going to happen is all this space now with Eaton, with Em, who's home now, and just realizing, okay, so how it's a bit much right now, and I'll be glad when we go back to better rhythms, and that's okay. But also at the same time, how do I continue to make that kind of space? There's lots of parents in the community who are facing into, okay, now we're homeschooling, we're doing all these things, but how can we hang on to a little bit of the beauty of that? How can we try to preserve some of that when we get back to normal?
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting piece for us to be aware of.
Yes. Yeah.
I think, I don't know. I think part of what's going to happen is some of the lessons are going to emerge over time, and there's things that are going to be immediate and they're aware to me now today, and there's others that are going to be, it's going to take the 4 weeks or the 6 weeks before I even begin to realize what's beautiful about this.
Right.
And then there's other going to be things that, immediately I regretted not having, like NHL or my hockey league got shut down, so I'm not playing hockey right now. There's those things that are taken away. I think in a month from now, there's going to be things that I'm not even noticing I'm missing right now, that all of a sudden I'm going to be lamenting those things. And I think giving ourselves a little bit of space to grieve the things that come to mind now, and then to grieve the things that come to mind later. That can be holy and that can be sacred, because that brings new awareness all the time. And then on the flip side, the same things. There's things I'm happy for now. There's things I'm going to be happy for in a month. And maybe even just writing that down becomes a healthy practice, so that I remember it in new ways.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Like to move towards the complexity of this moment rather than block it out. Like I was thinking, when we look back on this, I want to remember what this was really like. Like I don't want to be like, COVID-19, hardly remember it.
Yeah.
Like it's so significant.
Yeah.
I think like it's here. I want to take it in as it really is.
It's going to be one of those generational shaping moments. Like I think we're just sort of starting to realize how big it is now. But this is going to be a sort of like when I was a kid kind of conversation that we're going to have.
School got shut down.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Oh. Yeah, my brain just went dark there to go to like remember what. Do we want to say anything about like the things that we're worried about? Like what could this?
Yeah, I mean, what are you worried about?
Yeah, I mean, we are hearing as pastors in this community about our people in our community who are losing jobs already, and that I think that piece of like holding space. Wondering how to be really like present to those stories. I mean, Calgary's a really interesting city too. I'm still getting to know it as a city. So I've been here over 4 years. The language of like, we are Calgary, like we're a city who works together and comes together. Like, I really hope that's true. Like, I hope that's really true.
Yeah.
Because this is a time when we're going to really need that. Yeah. What else do I worry about? All kinds of things, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Calgary, there is a reality where we're getting hit with so many different things from so many different angles right now.
Yeah.
With oil and gas suffering the way that it is, which, let's be honest, is an industry that affects all of us.
Yeah.
Now with COVID-19, I mean, there's just a lot of different elements and a lot of change that's happening and is going to continue to happen. And I think that is what's going to be hard for people. It's not just the 1 or the 2 or the 3. It's just the massive change to social structure and the massive change to our normative patterns that we're used to. Things are going to go back to normal. Like, I don't want to be apocalyptic. Like, we will get through this together and we will come out the other side. But at the same time, things aren't going to be the same. Like, it's not just all going to go back to normal.
Right.
And that can create a lot of anxiety for people. I don't think it necessarily has to be that. I think we can have reverence for that and we can be aware of it. But there can also be good on the other side of it. But I think that's a reality that we're all kind of facing right now, is we don't know exactly what things will look like on the other side.
I mean, it's interesting too, because I think we use language of imagination quite a bit here. It's interesting to wonder about, like it's so hard to imagine a future that we're not in. It's such a difficult human experiment to imagine what the world could be like. It's like easier to like go backwards or something, and with our memories, although our memories are, all kinds of like distorted things anyways. But I wonder about our imagination in this moment too, I think. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Jonah.
Sure.
Jonah 2, as we remember that we're talking about COVID all the time, but we also want to have more to talk about. So let's
Yeah,
talk
and
about,
let me just say that. I mean, I think it was interesting because I had some thoughts last week about, hey, we're shutting down church. Should we like shut everything down and do a sermon about, what's happening in the world, or should we continue with our liturgy? And it was an interesting balance as I kind of went back and forth a few times about what I was going to talk about and how I was going to talk about it. And I think in the end, what sort of emerged from me in my reading and my study was this, we stay on the Jonah story, but we find these parallels and we bring them out. And that's what we'll talk about here. But I think there is something sort of instructing, informative around that idea that sometimes you stick with your plans and you stick with the things that you've done, but you allow that to be shaped in new ways. Rather than sort of, let's drop it and let's pick up this thing. We continued with Jonah, but we found parallels. We found access points to talk about what was happening in the world. And that just felt very, in one sense, very stable and very grounding for me. But it also didn't feel like I was avoiding things or pushing away from it. And maybe people had other experiences of that, but that's what it felt like for me. It was like,
I think we heard that in people's feedback from our live stream experiment on Sunday. People were saying, thank you for giving this space where it felt normal again, just for half an hour of listening to the sermon, half an hour of listening to some music and a prayer. It was like, this is a part of my life. And even though I'm in my living room in my pajamas, like, you're still there and I can still hear you. And that's really meaningful to me. So that seems important. Cool. So let's talk about, we talked about fear on Sunday, and you were making some distinctions between fear and reverence. And I just wondered if we could kind of keep expanding that.
So in the biblical side of the story, there's this interesting parallel that the writer of Jonah makes, and the language is very specific. So they feared a great fear. So gadol yareh is the Hebrew there for great fear. And that's when the storm is rising up. And then the sea calms down, and it says that they had a great fear of the Lord. So you end up with this great fear of fear versus great fear of the Lord. And so then I went to, there's the Jewish Publication Society that puts out all these commentaries on the Hebrew scriptures. And Uriel Simon was the one I was looking at. And he drew this beautiful sort of way of drawing the Hebrew thinking out there, that they were overcome by this fear of fear. And then they were opened up to this fear of the Lord. And that he felt was the gift, and it was the contrast to the other fear. Right. So a great fear of fear is the sort of negative thing that makes you afraid. Right. The great fear of the Lord is the gift on the other side of that brings you out of being afraid. Right. And it moves your attention away from fear and away from afraidness to reverence and awe and awareness of what really is in the Lord. And I just thought that was this really profound recognition, particularly at this time, where we have all of this stuff going around us, and we need to have awe, and we need to have reverence, and we need to take everything seriously. Yeah. But we also want to stay away from slipping into fear in the sense of, I'm afraid of being afraid, and all I want to do is like pull the blinds down and shut myself off, and I'm going to self-isolate because I'm afraid of the world, rather than I'm going to social distance because I care for the people around me. Right. And I'm going to do that for their good because I love them and because I'm actually thinking about them and engaging with them. And I think there's a fear that kind of like, we withdraw, we pull back, we get afraid of people. So if I'm afraid of sickness, now I'm afraid of you and I don't want you around. Right. Or there's a awe.
Like you become the virus.
Exactly. Yeah. Like now we're all afraid of each other, and that's not good. Like that's not going to draw us together. Yeah, exactly. But then how can we have, at the same time, thoughtfulness and awareness that deals with this on the terms that it deserves? Just like the fear of the Lord, because these sailors, they're not flippant. They offer sacrifices to the Lord. They make vows to God, these types of things. Like
they're really great characters.
They are great characters in the story, and I just love that ability that the rabbis and Hebrew thinkers have to play with language that way. Because that's what I talked about in the sermon, is we hear fear of the Lord, and immediately we're just like, it's the same word, therefore I should be afraid of God.
Right. And one of the things I want to say about this is, I remember, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, who knows, timelines, right? realizing that like I did not want that kind of fear in my spiritual life. That kind
Right.
of, because that to me was like an abusive deity.
Mhm.
Like I thought it was when I was trying to date, and I thought I want to move towards someone, and I don't want to be afraid of them. And why would I want to be afraid? That's an abusive deity, and if God is an abuser, I want nothing to
Mhm.
do with that God. I'll be fine on my own. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. But I think it's really important to like dig into that. How can we actually read the scriptures with that, the kind of like the beauty and the reverence?
Mhm.
Like, should we just develop some muscles in our mind to be like, every time I see that word, I switch it? Or what does that
Yeah.
really look like? You know?
I think it's tough because sometimes we speak a different language,
Right.
and we have different rules in English than they do in Hebrew. We have different vocabulary. I mentioned it quickly, but biblical Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, has such a limited
Right.
vocabulary
It's like
compared.
Lego.
Yeah.
It's like primary colors Lego.
Yeah.
Like I often think about, we're just like building with these blocks.
When you are learning biblical Hebrew, like in your undergrad, they will tell you like 600 words, and you've basically got a working vocabulary. Like most of us have thousands of words in our English vocabulary. A lot of us have like upwards of 10,000 words that we use in our English vocabulary. That doesn't even exist in Hebrew. And therefore, words take on all kinds of different meanings depending on their context. And you have to kind of get into the, not what does this word say, but what is this story about? How do I put myself in this story? How do I put myself in these shoes? How do I imagine myself in the context of what's happening here? And then what's the semantic range of what these words might have meant to me in that moment? But it's difficult.
Right.
And I think that's where we have to have sermons. We have to speak together in ways that sort of broaden this out for us a bit.
Right, which is that the practice of midrash.
Right.
There's rabbis saying like, what if it means this? What if it means that? No, I think it could mean that. Like, oh, what if this character is actually like this other thing? I think we're of such a mindset that's like looking for the answer a lot of the time, rather than like opening up the story.
Yeah. So one of the things we talked about in the series was, what if this story is a writer looking back on the conquest of the Northern Kingdom by the Assyrians and saying, what if we had done things differently? That's not me saying that is what's going on here. I think it is. When I look at the story, like I think that's what's going on.
That moment,
I know. Yeah.
I was like, hold up.
I did. If you're interested in that, I did a video on our YouTube channel. You can see it down below. It's called Alternate Timelines in the Bible. And talked about it a bit more. But you're right. But what the beauty is being able to say, hey, what if this is happening here? Can we stop? Can we talk? Can we think about that? And in the Hebrew tradition, there's this rich ability to be able to do that in ways that I think sometimes in Christianity, we just get scared of.
Yes.
Of asking, what if this is happening? And I think if we did that a little bit more, I think we would have as much richer understanding of what's going on in these stories. Now, I also think we can take that same approach to the New Testament, particularly, like Paul's different, right? Because Paul has something he wants to say in mind. And then we have to do our best scholarship and our best thinking to figure that out. But parables,
little sayings.
I mean, parables are meant to have multiple interpretations. If Jesus wanted to get you to one point, he could have gotten you there. He tells stories so that all of us can come at these things from different angles and say, what's going on here? And by the way, I'll give a plug here. Go onto our YouTube channel and look for source critical approaches in Luke. If you search that, you'll find it somewhere. But we talked about one of these parables in Luke, where Luke and Matthew take a parable from Jesus, and they seem to think it means the exact opposite thing. And that's a really beautiful thing. That doesn't have to be a scary thing. It's realizing that parables come to us in all kinds of different ways.
Right. I was trying to make a link between what I said earlier, that kind of like midrash way of looking at a story or a word, a parable, a question Jesus asked, but also like doing that with our own spiritual lives. Like that moment where I was like, I think I've been taught to fear God, and I want to move away from that in my life. What if God is to me, I don't know. I've been thinking about this idea of a key for a long time, like a key that unlocks something, a key that unlocks myself to myself, aspects of my relationships, parts of my desire, all of that. But I think that it's interesting to play with what that could look like. If I'm uncomfortable with this part of my relationship with the divine, what if I change it?
Yeah.
What if I just change it?
And I think for some people, I like the language of the fear of the Lord in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
But for me, I make the distinction between being afraid of God and having this awareness or fear of the Lord, because that is biblical language. That is what it says. But, how do we understand that semantic range in there? To me, to just step back and say, oh, I don't want to be afraid of God. I don't think that's how my conception of the divine works. So then, therefore, what does fear of the Lord look like for me? Yeah. For me, it doesn't look like being, good point.
I think I might in 10 years be like, it's time for me to get afraid.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and here's the beauty of it. So when I'm doing things that I know are hurting other people, fear of the Lord becomes a really meaningful way for me to think about God. So I don't want to jettison that. Yeah. I just want to have the ability to allow it to speak to me at the moment that I'm in. When I am in a good place and when I am drawing near to God, I don't want the fear of the Lord to be something that pushes me away and makes me afraid. Yeah. When I'm doing things that I know aren't right and they're not helpful and they're hurting my wife or someone that I work with or people around me, then I want a different kind of fear of the Lord that's going to push back on me. Right. Not because God's going to get me. That's not how I conceptualize God.
It's this this isn't, you aren't being who you were meant to be. Somebody who would know more, know better. Yeah. Let's talk about.
I'm out of coffee.
You're out of coffee.
Sorry.
Did you bring water?
No.
Other modes to hydrate yourself.
Yeah, sorry. We'll make it.
He's gonna be okay. There's bubbly in the fridge.
Oh,
yeah. Let's talk about Jonah's cut and paste prayer. From the bottom of the sea, because I think this idea is so interesting. That the scene is so interesting that we hear. This kind of collage of language. It's also interesting that he's like praying this prayer of deliverance, but he's stuck. In a place.
So 2 things I find really interesting about the prayer. One, he talks about the Lord is my salvation, and I don't think for a moment that we should assume he thinks, having been swallowed by a fish, that things are okay now. Like, I don't think in the moment when that fish swallows you, you're like, okay, it's all good. Like, this fish is going to spit me out on dry land. Like,
he doesn't know where that.
Exactly. Like the character in the story is not thinking that. The character in the story is probably still thinking, I'm done. I've got seconds or minutes left here before my life is snuffed out.
It's like Hail Mary.
Is it a Hail Mary, or is it, I trust that you are going to do good for me, whatever comes next? I don't know. Yeah. It's a really interesting prayer.
Samuel, though. I don't know if he really goes there.
So I don't know what's going on, but it's a really interesting thing because I don't think at all the character of Jonah is supposed to know that he's saved when he gets swallowed by a whale. Yeah. So when he's saying that prayer, I still think he thinks he's done for.
Yeah. What do you think of all the space it takes up? It's not short.
Yeah, of a 4-chapter book, it's a whole chapter of it. It's 1/4 of the entire book.
Right. I didn't count how many lines there are, but I mean, it would be different in Hebrew anyways.
Yeah, actually, interesting thing. So on Sunday, I wanted to get through chapter 2, and I spent a lot of time talking about the last verse of chapter 1. Yeah. That's because that's the start of chapter 2 in Hebrew. So in the Hebrew Bible, the story ends with Jonah being thrown into the ocean. Yeah. Chapter 2 starts with a great whale swallows him, and then he prays. For some reason in English, we were like, well, we can't end a chapter with him being thrown in the water. And so we had to have the whale come along and swallow him so that we all knew it was all going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.
Exactly. So there's a sof pasuk, which is like it's like a hard stop at the end of, and then Jonah was thrown in the water. Right. So as a Hebrew reader, you end with he got tossed in the water, period. I love that. And then you wait, and then it's like, and then a fish showed up to swallow him. And I had a whole section written on that, and I had to cut it for time because it was already too long. But that's actually part of chapter 2. So it goes with the prayer. It doesn't go with the interaction on the boat, which is a really interesting piece. So the other thing about the prayer. he quotes from 11 different Psalms. Now, the Psalms are broken up into different categories. And in Jonah, too, all of the quotes come from Psalms of thanksgiving.
Okay.
So they aren't from the Psalms of lament.
Yeah.
They're from the Psalms of praise or thanksgiving, which is a really interesting moment or interesting frame. Because again, Jonah is literature. So whoever is writing this story, yes, there's the character of Jonah who's in the belly, who's like pulling from his memory and he's quoting all these things. There's also a writer who's choosing the things to put into the mouth of Jonah for very specific reasons. And he's choosing Psalms of Thanksgiving. So what does that mean? Well, I think part of it means that the prayer of Jonah, this calling out to the Lord that ends with him on the beach, is a sort of precursor to the idea of a second chance. So the character might not know that he's going to get saved, he's going to end up on a beach. But the writer of this story chooses Psalms of Thanksgiving to express this idea that in our most precarious situation, even at the bottom of the ocean, even in the belly of a whale, our prayers are expressions of a second chance that is coming all the time, no matter how many times we need it. And I kind of really, I really love this idea that that's what the salvation is. It's not the character. There's always a second chance. And so we can give thanks for that. No matter where I am, I don't know what's coming next, but I can give whatever that's going to look like for me. Yeah.
Which is really appropriate for a moment.
It is. Yeah, it really is. So.
Yeah. So did you say that if a big fish were coming for you, you would make up your own prayers? Are you more on the I would go to the prayers of another, or I would find my own words for my prayer?
Well, my comment was that I would have some colorful language that would come out in that moment. So I mean, what I was trying to express there was the idea that I don't think I would be eloquent enough to quote someone in that moment. I would just scream and say help. Right. And so I think there's that interesting contrast there. I don't know. Maybe would you do something different?
Well, it made me think about different times of my own deconstruction.
Sure.
When I could not find my own words for prayer.
Yes.
And prayer books became incredibly important to me, and sort of cutting and pasting the prayers of others into my own life. So I think I don't know, I just kind of offer that. If you're I don't know what to pray, it's okay. There are lots of prayers in the world that you can find and pray for yourself that have taught me larger ways to speak and ways to be with God.
If I totally think if I imagine myself in a moment where a fish is coming at me, no, I don't think I'd be eloquent enough to go back to the prayers of the people.
Let me go get my book.
Exactly. But I do agree that when I feel anxious, when I'm upset, far more frequently, I pray liturgical prayers.
Yes.
The video that's gonna come out in a couple of days is about the Jesus prayer, which is a really meaningful one for me. It's a really simple one. And I go back to it over and over again. I find it very calming because it's part of how I breathe. There's a rhythm to it. So those things. And then I also have a number of prayer books in my office that I go back to, and I read those things. So yes, in moments of stress, in moments of everything's falling apart, I do usually go to liturgical prayers. In a moment of the bus is about to hit me or the whale is about to swallow me, I'm a little more panicked.
I swear to.
Yeah.
But maybe this does make me think about this moment. I was we grew up quite differently. I grew up in the Catholic Church.
Right.
So surrounded by imagery, surrounded by liturgy, surrounded by bodies that bow. You go up, you receive the Eucharist, you come back, you take the kneeler down from the pew, you kneel down, you daydream for 2 minutes, and then you sit back in your pew. But in the worst moments of my life, I have gone back to this very simple little chorus. It's "Be not afraid, I go before you always. Come follow me and I will give you rest." And it's just, I can sit here this man in my parish with his guitar, strumming away. But this moment that we're in, those of you who are with your kids at home, the ways that we impress upon them these songs and prayers that can carry them and go with them, not only in this moment of pandemic in the world, but far beyond that, I think is an opportunity to remember our own formation and pass on the formation of our faith in very careful and poetic ways.
There's somebody asking about where can you find some prayers. So I'll give Bobby here a second. But I think one of the things I would suggest is going to commons.church/liturgy. So we create a lot of prayers here at the church. Sometimes, like Bobby said, they are cut and paste from ancient prayers of the church. But Bobby, Yelena, our team craft, some really beautiful liturgical prayers. And all of those get posted every Sunday to our website. And that is an area that I have actually gone back to, and I pull some of those prayers and I read them to myself and I pray them. So it's not a book, but it's one there.
Maybe someday.
Yeah, we could compile some of that stuff because there's a lot of beauty in that. But do you have any prayer books that you'd suggest?
I do love Common Prayer for Ordinary Radicals, which is a book, but also every day when you just go to commonprayerforordinaryradicals.net or something, they have all the day's prayers, which I can't remember.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay. They're beautiful. I can throw a link in the chat in a moment. And I also love Celtic Daily Prayer. It's a beautiful book. Put it on your list for the future. Also reading some Rumi or some poetry and prayers from other faith traditions can expand your own imagination for prayer. I think it can be really beautiful.
Right. We could maybe compile some stuff and put some on the liturgy blog, but check that out as well.
Okay, let's talk about how are we doing?
How are we doing for time here?
Okay,
maybe one more question.
Right on track.
Okay, all right.
So I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit more about the absurdity of the Jonah story and the absurdity of the moment that we're in terms of like, I can't believe it. I'm going to be in my house for like weeks with kids. I don't have kids, but you are maybe in that space. And finding these opportunities to like acknowledge, again, the seriousness of the moment. And every day the news as it shifts, but also finding like little moments of laughter and being able to like step back and be like, this is absurd. Should you feel the need to laugh?
Talk a little bit. It is. It's a really interesting thing to see, and we touched on this earlier, and maybe I stepped on your toes here, but the idea that Jonah is a very serious book with very serious ideas in there. Like, how much more serious can you get than the idea of taking the message of grace and God's love to the very people that conquered your country and
brutally,
violently,
hauled you off
into exile, burned your homes, took you away. Like, how much a more serious idea can this story be about, but then to be set with such an absurd story and comedy? There is something really profound about that. And that's what I talked about in the first week of the series, this idea that when we laugh, we can be opened up to reality in new ways. And we think about things in ways that we're not used to. That something can feel overwhelming. And then when we can laugh about it, it's like we step outside of it for a moment, we can look at it from a new angle. And it doesn't become less big. It doesn't become less important. It's just now we get another angle on it. And I think that is something that becomes really important for our particular time right now, that we can have free-flowing, open conversations like this. We are working really hard to craft like these beautiful prayers already on Monday and Tuesday, to put that out there so that you can pray with your children, you can pray with your family, you can pray yourself and reflect on what's happening. But and there's a moment for that, and it's really important. It's also really important to just like pick up FaceTime and talk to family and not be anxious about the moment, but just how are you doing right now, and check in with neighbors and be able to do that as well. And the sort of juxtaposition of those things is part of the sacredness of it. So being able to laugh with family about something that's funny right now is not just, it doesn't just take your mind off things. It's sacred because it reminds you of the full experience of what it means to be human right now, where we are in a place where it's very easy to forget how to be fully human and to only be on edge. And we have to be on edge, and that's important too. But if we're only that, like, we can't sustain that kind of thing for a long time. So laughter becomes important, and joy becomes important, and rest becomes important, especially when you're at home with nothing to do. like resting and sleeping well
Yeah.
actually becomes really important. Like all of these things, and how do we maintain all of that right now?
I'm going back to like the physicality of our stress
Yeah.
and anxiety, and the physicality of our laughter, and like the importance of those things taking up residence inside of us. That like when I laugh, like my shoulders release, and maybe your jaw has a little respite. I don't know.
Bobby's giving me a hard time because for the last like 6 months, I've had a lot of problem with clenching my jaw at night. So I come in and I complain about it at work, and then Bobby asks me. So
you're wearing a hoodie.
And I'm wearing a hoodie, so like clearly I'm relaxed now. So, but yeah,
I was. Oh, is there a moment where comedy like shifted something really significant for you? Can you think of like?
That's a good question.
And I have one.
Yeah, go.
I was thinking about. I often think about Michael Che's special. I can't remember what it's called on Netflix, and he is one of the head writers of SNL, and he talks about the power of white women, and it put me in my place. like I love to get all like fired up about all things feminist and like social justice matters to me, of course. But Michael Che talked about, and he had this whole bit about women gentrifying Brooklyn, and I was like, it was hilarious. But it took this thing, and I looked at myself, and then I carried on a little bit differently because of it. I also had a laugh because I was like, that is true.
Yeah. I mean, laughing at yourself is
my favorite thing.
Yeah, but it's, it's hard, right? It's easy to laugh at other people, but to legitimately sort of become aware of your own absurdity and the ways that you move through the world. I mean, I think that's a hard thing for all of us to do, right? Yeah. So, we all like to be woke about other people. Right. None of us want to be woke about ourselves, right? So,
Michelle Wolf says, "You're a little too woke. Go to sleep." Also a great special. I can't promise it's clean. It's not. But it's great. Can you think of a moment where you watched?
I mean, the example that I used in the sermon was Nanette by Hannah Gadsby. Yeah. So if people haven't seen that one,
now's the time.
Yeah, I mean,
well, is it? Now the time, it's intense.
Yeah, it's intense. So it's hilarious all at the same time. I mean, I'm hesitant to say this one, but there have been moments with Louis C.K., and I know there's a lot of complex things about Louis in the last couple of years. But I mean, he shall not be named. Exactly, yeah. But he also named some things, I think, for a lot of us that we have to be more aware of in terms of what it means to be caring for people, to be aware of our privilege, all those things. And I think this is, another one of the complexities of it. The people who do terrible things sometimes have also said really powerful things. And, you can talk about that in comedy. I've had that in my own life where people I've looked up to and, had a lot of admiration for have really let me down. And I've had to work through on the other side of that. How do I be honest with who this person really is now, and the fact that now I see them in a different way, and I'm never not going to be able to see them fully. I mean, that's Louis C.K. I'm never not going to be able to see him the way that I do now. It's not going to go back. At the same time, is there still truth? Is there wisdom in the things that he said? Are there ways that he, opened me to new things? And that goes beyond just Me Too and Louis C.K. and moments in media right now. That goes for all of our lives. Like at some point, you and I are going to disappoint people in our community. Hopefully, not in ways that we can't work through and get past. But I mean, that's the reality of being human. That's the reality of investing in someone, is at some point they're going to let you down. Does that mean that it devalues all the truth and the beauty in what they've said to you? No. But it also doesn't mean you ignore it. So for whatever that's worth.
Can you laugh at it?
Yeah.
Did you get to a place where you laugh at it?
I will say, in my personal life, I'm thinking of one particular situation where somebody that I work with made some mistakes, and it was really deep, and it was really painful, and it was really hard for me because that was someone who had a huge impact in shaping my life and getting me back into ministry when I had left it. I can't laugh about the things that happened and the people that were hurt, but I was able to rebuild that relationship in different ways. I'm able to laugh with him. I'm able to be friends and to learn from him in new ways. I can't go back to the way things were. Our relationship can't go back to the way that things were. But yeah, I mean, there are ways that you can, you can't go back, but you can create a new future. And it takes time. It took years, literally years. So this was not a 1 week and I thought about it and then I forgave and we moved forward. Like it took years to do it. But you know, as an encouragement, there can be a new normal on the other side, somewhere way down the line sometimes.
Yeah. I think that maybe all of our humor is a little bit different too.
Sure.
But I think about some of the relationships in my life that really hurt me and then how it shaped me in like some of the ways I'm most proud of. That there is something almost comical about that. Like not like, haha, what a funny joke, but oh my goodness, can you believe that reversal?
Yeah.
Like, can you believe that the thing that completely crushed me became this like thing that shaped me? And one of the things that I value most. Right? There's something of humor.
So Frederick Buechner, you know this book. You know, the gospel is a fairy tale, tragedy, and comedy. And that's what he talks about, the comedy of the cross, which is such a, you know, absurd way to think about it at first. But what he's talking about is like, how absurd is it to think about the God of the universe who created everything, then coming, being stripped naked and put on a cross. And it's painful and it's hard. But then there comes a moment where you just say like, how absurd is our universe that our God would do this? And these reversals that he talks about, that you expect one thing and then you see another. And there is something that it's not a ha funny. It's a like, I can't believe the universe is like this kind of way. So if you haven't read that, Frederick Buechner, The Gospel is Tragedy, Fairy Tale, and Comedy is a fantastic, it's a short little book too, and it's beautiful. He's such a good writer. So check it out. Yeah.
Okay, so this is my last bit,
okay.
I think. So you had this line that you preached on Sunday, that God is not in paradise waiting. God is already in Nineveh working. And I wanted to bring us back to the moment that we're in. And I wrote the prayer in the service on Sunday and thought a lot about, you know, some of the language of the prayer was, in an uncertain time, we often move from security to scarcity, and wherever we go, God, you are there. You know, that like, I wanted to move from not always be in the place where we hope we are, that like, maybe I am feeling really insecure about this moment, and God, you are there. So thinking about like, how is God in the bad place?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the point of that opening chapter. You know, God says, I want you to go to Nineveh, and Jonah runs away and goes the other way because he wants to get away from the presence of God. And Jonah's not thinking it through. But as the reader, you're supposed to say, well, if he's going away from God, where is God? God's in Nineveh. I mean, that was 3 weeks ago now. Now we find ourselves in this place where the world is shutting down. It's having drastic impacts on our economy. All of us are going to feel this. Like, there is no way for any of us to get around this. Where is God in this right now? And I think that's a very honest and valid question. And I don't know that I have an answer. Like, I can't say, here's God, here's why it's okay. Here's how God is making it all better. But I do have, and this is the faith posture of it. I have this faith posture that tells me, well, God is still present to me right now. Even when I can't see God, even in Nineveh, where things feel very wicked and things feel very oppressive, I'm going to trust that God is here. And I'm going to trust that as I move through and I'm faithful and I do what I should do and I care for the people around me and I don't just look after myself and I don't hoard to myself, I mean, in literal ways right now, but in figurative ways, that I'm going to encounter God at some point along the way. And I think this is what gets difficult, is that piece of, I'm going to keep doing the next right thing, and I'm going to keep being generous, and I'm going to keep being faithful, and I'm going to keep trusting that eventually here in shutdown Calgary, in Nineveh, I am going to encounter God. And I don't know when, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm going to keep moving in that direction. And this is the hard part, is that's not a logical thing. Like, that's a faith posture thing. That's a thing that I'm choosing to say I'm going to find. And I think this is, you know, there's something here that I think is an interaction between our psychology and our spirituality, where the more we choose to believe we're going to encounter good, then the more we see it, right? So when Paul talks about whatever is good, whatever is pure, what is lovely, admirable, think about these things, I think what he's saying there is when you focus on those things, you will notice them.
Right.
They're not more or less, but he's saying, look around you, find what's good, and
Yeah.
center yourself on that. And then you're going to be more aware of that goodness all around you all the time. So that's a psychological element of
Yes,
it. Like,
right.
like when we look, it's the power of positive thinking,
Right.
not taken to the ridiculous extreme of thinking that if I'm just positive, the universe is going to make everything go well for me. Because it's not true, right? Like I can be super positive, and sometimes the world doesn't work the way that I want.
Yeah.
However, when I find the good wherever I am and I celebrate that, then I become more aware, I become more open, my eyes open up to different things, and I see the world in different ways. So there's that piece.
Yeah.
That's the psychology side. The spirituality side is this faith piece of saying, I think the story is bigger than this moment.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm going to keep pushing forward until the story reaches the end that I know it's moving to.
Right.
And I don't know how it's going to get there.
Yeah.
And there might be a lot of twists and turns, and it might not be on my timeline, but I do believe that the story ends with good and the story ends with beauty.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just keep pushing forward, believing in that, because that's what the gospel tells me, is that God is going to do good for all of us. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know when, but I believe that. And so I trust that, and I'm going to keep moving forward that. I'm going to keep creating that in my world right now. And that's what we talk about, the kingdom of God or commonwealth of God. That's what that idea means for me, that I trust that God is good.
Yeah.
So right now, when I care for the common good, I'm going to help create that commonwealth, because I believe that one day that type of approach to the world will be the only approach to the world.
Right. And the doing of that
Mm-hmm.
is bringing some of that future
Yes.
to the present.
Yeah.
Like it I read a tweet by Propaganda today, and it sounded like, I read it pretty quickly. He pulled up to a grocery store with one of his kids, the hip hop artist, wherever he lives in the world. And there was some anxiety in his child about like, how much should we buy at the store? And he said, I haven't been through a pandemic before, but I have been poor before. Mm. And I know one thing, like we will take whatever's like, we'll be the last to take. Mm. And he said something in this small little tweet that I think that's what brought my daughter or son, I can't remember, some calm. And I thought like, oh my goodness, if we approach the grocery store like that, like I'm going to wait. Go ahead. You buy the toilet paper. I'll just get what's left. Like if we approached, our resources in that way, we are bringing that future like here now. Cool. I want to be that neighbor. I want to be that neighbor.
Yeah.
So let's end with a practice of gratitude.
Sure.
What are 3 things you're feeling grateful for?
Interesting. I would say, first of all, I am, and this is not I'm really thankful for our staff team here. Yeah. It's been a crazy sort of 72 hours here, but our team has worked really hard from wherever they are, pulling together, caring for each other, looking out for each other. It's a real gift to be able to work on the fly and adapt to these things as we go, but to get to do that in team. Mm-hmm. And I know not everybody has that. A lot of people are making decisions and adapting to things sort of on their own or with their family. Yeah. And I've got to do that with my wife and with my son and now our daughter, but also with this whole team of people here at Common. So that's first thing. Second, I'm really grateful that I do have enough. So we are not particularly vulnerable in this moment. And there have been changes to our patterns, changes to our habits. But we do have the resources to look after ourselves. We do have community around us, that will care for us and stuff. And that's really beautiful. So there are people who can't get to the store. There are people who are immunocompromised in different ways that are really fearful of going out right now. And there's a little bit of that because, Emma is still quite immunocompromised. So I am a little fearful about getting sick and bringing that home to her. But personally, I'm healthy. I'm not concerned about that. So I'm grateful for that. And the last thing I would say is I am grateful for this larger community. One of the beautiful moments on Sunday was seeing, if you saw our Instagram feed, all the images of people sharing them watching the sermon and the service online. And, preaching to an empty room is a weird experience. Like you're just standing there and you're like, there's no feedback and you're not really sure what's going on. And you're just trying to talk. But then seeing people participating along with us when I got off the stage and seeing those images was like, oh, right. So I'm in this empty room. I'm here with a couple of people, but there's literally, hundreds of people and then plus online tracking with us and engaging with us. And there was a little moment of not feeling quite so alone and quite so isolated. And it feels like a small thing, but it was actually kind of a little beautiful thing too.
Beautiful.
So yeah. Yours?
I am great. I'm incredibly grateful for this community. Sometimes I still am like, I get to live with this. Like I'm pinching myself. I love it. I'm grateful for the larger story of Jonah. I think it's really interesting. And I'm preaching on Sunday, so I'm grateful to like be really kind of like diving into the narrative this week. That's really fun. And I'm really grateful for Jonathan.
Yes.
I just feel so good.
I'm a little grateful for Jonathan too. He's a nice guy.
I just feel really grateful for that guy that I get to be married to him.
Cool. Well, one of the batteries on our cameras has died, and we are just over an hour here. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. What I'll say is this before we go, leave us some feedback, send us a message. We're going to work on this. This is new. As you saw, we didn't even have mics on for the first 5 minutes. So we'll make some adjustments as we go. But we do want to continue these sort of live online dialogues with you, maybe for good, but at least through this period. We don't want to just be creating sermons and content to put out there. We want some interaction here. And I know some of our pastoral team have been in the chat. We haven't been able to do that as much tonight, but maybe we can work on that, how we can be a little more interacting with the chat space as well. But thanks for joining with us tonight. We weren't sure what this was going to be like. Hopefully, it catches on and you can give us some feedback and we'll give it a shot again next week.
It's just going to be so popular.
Yeah. Same time next week.
Yeah.
Should we do that?
Yeah,
okay.
we'll be here.
Tuesday, 7 p.m. next week. We'll do the same type of a conversation and we'll pick it up from there. But thanks, everyone. Hope you're staying safe. If you need anything from us, there is a form at commons.life. We have lots of volunteers and we have supplies. We can drop stuff off to you. If you know someone in your neighborhood that does need some food, does need some supplies, does need some soap, let us know and we will get stuff out to them right away. It's a really important thing, I think, for us as a community that we're able to care for each other in this time, certainly socially, but also obviously for our physical needs as well. So, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Later.